Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So let me make sure I'm up. I'm seeing green all around, so I'm going to take it as an act of faith that things are going. So, guys, I hope you guys have had a decent New Year up to this point, and well, not just up to this point. I hope you guys have a decent New Year in general. Let's get into the news. You guys have heard me make a case, and I think the case is right. In fact, I think it's somewhat of a flat fact that it's right. That anything that happens outside of yourself has to be to some degree ambiguous. Meaning, let's say if one is certainty and zero is complete, nonsense. Most things are either approaching certainty or approaching nonsense. Ultimately, it's difficult to come down with this idea of an absolute, yes, this is something that absolutely took place, and I am perfect knowledge, or I have a very good degree of certainty that this particular thing took place. Oftentimes, we're stuck with ambiguity. I think this took place. I have a strong belief this took place. Or I think this is utter nonsense and bunk and baloney. But do I know it as a flat fact? Most things, no, you don't. You know that you exist outside of you. It's a fucking crapshoot. That being said, this is doubly so when we're looking at news and media. Meaning, information that comes to us from media, it doesn't function that way in practice. So in practice, it works as, this is the main narrative. Anything that deviates from this narrative is a conspiracy theory. This, of course, gets extremely problematic when the media becomes stenographers for whatever the government tells it. Meaning the FBI, the CIA, NSA, or one of these organizations, they repeat a line. And even though these organizations, governments, have a history of lying to the populace, they still take this stuff as if it's the word of God and just spew it out to the public almost uncritically. When Barack Obama went into Syria, sending, essentially giving aid and support to terrorist organizations. Now, we've had people go over there. There were other journalists that went over there. There were Tulsi Gabbard, for God's sakes, went over. Comes back and says, look, I've seen it with my own eyes. We are supporting terrorist organizations. We are giving terrorist groups weapons and support. And those groups are trying to topple the Syrian government. That's the reality of it. That is not the reality that the media gave you. And I'm making a point here. Let's take a look at this. This is from Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore had an interview with Raina Kilaic. And I want you to hear what she has to say about this. And I'm going to develop this. By the way, from a context standpoint, well, let's hear a testimony first. This story is not about Syria, by the way. The story is about Iran. But I need to make a point. I need to develop it. So let's take a look.
So, I've said many times on this show that the mainstream news media does not tell us the truth about foreign policy or our wars. In fact, I did a report where everything the mainstream news media is telling you about Syria is a lie. And people are often blown away. In fact, they don't believe me when I tell them that our own government funded ISIS and Al-Qaeda to fight in Syria against Assad. So again, it's not like everything you think you know about Syria isn't true. So you've actually been there. You've reported on it. What do you think are the biggest misconceptions that Americans have about the Syrian war? And what do you think they need to know?
Well, they have this big misconception, first and foremost, that the U.S. didn't do anything in Syria, that the big problem in Syria is the U.S. didn't intervene. When in Syria, the opposition that was U.S.-backed and Western-backed is probably one of the best-funded, best-armed oppositions in the history of any opposition group ever. The U.S. was giving something like $1 billion, up to $1 billion a year, to like a bunch of different rebel groups in Syria that were basically ultimately all working alongside or, in fact, a part of Al-Qaeda. And so we are essentially, the U.S., the most shocking aspect of what we did in Syria is that the U.S. was essentially helping the group that was responsible for doing 9/11. I mean, it's kind of shocking to even say that. It sounds like some sort of joke, like a bad joke, but that's what happened. And then the next level with Syria is beyond that. It's like the level of, actually Syria is probably the first issue where, I just never seen the level of propaganda that we saw when it came to the Syrian war. It was to such an extreme degree. And the reason I know that is because not only because I was there, but also I have family in Syria. And I used to be one of these people who kind of believed in the other side when it came to Syria, the idea that there was this sort of like, legitimate like armed uprising that was just trying to fight the government, like some like romantic uprising. But the thing is, I have family in Syria, and when your family's involved and your family like is surrounded by Al Qaeda, it quickly becomes clear what's actually happening on the ground. So yeah, I would say that's probably the biggest issue with Syria, though, is that Americans have no idea that their government helped create what is now the biggest Al Qaeda affiliate in the history of Al Qaeda in Idlib in Syria. And as a result, I mean, this is something that's going to have consequences for decades to come. And when there's an attack down the line and it comes from this particular group, Americans are going to have no idea the role that their government played. And it's a lot like what America did in Afghanistan in the 1980s, which was fund jihadist groups to fight the Soviets. And then not long after that, these jihadist groups that America funded, the Mujahideen, transformed into Al Qaeda. And then you have 9/11.
So I'm glad you mentioned I'm glad you mentioned Russia, Mujahideen. The United States was assisting Afghanistan to rebuff Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time, putting money into these groups, thinking that the more radicalized these guys will be, the more of a bulwark they will be for the Soviet Union. Now, the United States wanted to turn Afghanistan into Russia, into Soviet Union's Vietnam, and you can make a case that they did. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they did. The consequence of that, however, is now you have these religious maniacs running around the region. The reason why I'm showing the story is because I kind of want to rebuff the narrative that mainstream media goes with, that whatever America does, just by virtue of being America, is right. We may fuck up, but we don't necessarily do things for bad ends. I'm saying that is a bogus assessment. And taking that point of view allows people to get this wrong idea of our actions in outside of in other countries. A leaked memo. Let's show this. Rex Tillerson. Leaked memo, School Tillerson on human rights. Now, not so much School Tillerson on, well, no, you can say School Tillerson, but Tillerson already understood what was going on. Tillerson gave a comment that pissed or freaked a few people out, making the point that human rights was not the priority of the United States. The memo was sent to Tillerson, giving more context and more detail to that. But it's a duh to anybody who watches and pays attention to this stuff. It may be shocking to the rest of the population. And again, I say that because mainstream media takes a narrative that when the United States does something around the globe, it's doing it for the right reasons, even though it may go horribly, horribly awry. I'm saying that we don't do things for the right reasons. We create a pretext. That pretext is what we use to go in and do whatever that particular government wants to do. So if that's to undermine the Syrian government, then yeah, we're going to send people because we're going to say Assad is a horrible guy. We're not going to talk about the fact that Syria, for the most part, has a decent infrastructure and everything else. They control their own country. I mean, granted, Assad is a strong man. I'm making a point that it's none of our business. We shouldn't have anything to do with it. And yet, we're sending aid to terrorist groups in that part of the world, in Syria. And look, this is not just Syria. We stick our fingers in one government after the next. Granted, we were a little bit more overt in regards to Libya. We were more overt in regards to Iraq. But I'm just saying, when we do things, it's not purely for humanitarian reasons, and oftentimes humanitarian reasons have nothing to do with it. We are close allies with Saudi Arabia, even though these guys chop heads off. I mean, come on. Come on. Even in WikiLeaks, we're expanding, or Saudi Arabia was responsible for spreading terrorism throughout that particular region of the world, even though they're one of our closest allies. Qatar, same thing. We don't care about strongmen. That's what we say. We say we care about that stuff. We don't actually care about that stuff. Rex Tillerson was given a memo that got that across better than anybody else. Like I said, anybody looking at this who pays attention to what we do around the globe would say, no, duh. But I like it that they made it explicit. On May 17th, the memo reads like a crash course for a businessman turned diplomat, and its conclusions offer a starkly realistic vision that the United States should use human rights as a club against its adversaries, like Iran, China, and North Korea, while giving a pass to repressive allies in the Philippines, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Allies should be treated differently and better. than adversaries. Otherwise, we end up with more adversaries and fewer allies, argued the memo, written by Tillerson's influential policy aide, Brian Hook. And that is what takes place. Regardless of everything that we say, regardless of what these guys, these grinning idiots say in regards to the reasons that they do things, ultimately, the reason is purely political, meaning, I'm saying this poorly, the reason that the United States behaves around the globe has nothing to do with humanitarian reasons. This has everything to do with whatever the motivations is for that particular government, for our government, be it political or be it some kind of, working against an adversary, or even just for some kind of resource, meaning corporate interests. Nothing to do with humanitarian reasons. Everything to do with what we want. Recently, protests have sparked in Iran. Those protests have been all over the place. This is, let's show, this is some fascinating, scary stuff. These protests have spread all over the country at this point, and it's not perfectly clear as to why. So this is the Washington Post. I know this is a lot of content, but I'm trying to make a point. Anti-government protests in Iran, where demonstrations and political unrest are rare, have left at least 20 people dead and do not appear to be subsiding. Since Thursday, tens of thousands of protesters have formed the largest outpouring of government opposition since the volatile 2009 presidential election. The scale and ferocity of the protests had clerical leaders in Tehran struggling on Tuesday to respond to what is likely the most serious internal crisis the country has faced in a decade. Now, I'm not against protests. I'm not against revolt, opposition, none of that stuff. I think those things are awesome. People should have a right to self-determination. And if the government is doing something that the people of that particular populace don't like, then the people of that populace need to handle their business. So if that means strikes, if that means sit-ins, if that means riots, whatever that population feels it needs to do to push off an oppressive regime, it's up to that population. Now, so I want to give my firm support for earnest protests and earnest revolt. But is it earnest? Like, the United States should have nothing to do with this at all, and yet does the United States have something to do with this this seemingly spontaneous protest that just kind of erupted all over the country? Whether this has to do with more political rights, whether this has to do with just not liking this idea of a cleric running the country, I don't know. Whatever the reason, though, I am in favor, and I'm trying to split the apple in this. I'm in favor of people with this idea of self-determination and choosing their government, choosing how they want to be represented, and choosing how they form around themselves, meaning how they set up their government. What I don't want is us putting our fingers in the mix. And I'd argue that it is impossible to know whether we or our quote-unquote allies, meaning Europeans, had anything to do with getting involved in this process. Hell, it doesn't even have to be Europeans. It could be Saudis or I'm just saying, I am skeptical of protests like this. Back in, I forget the year, I think it was in the 70s or 50s. I think it was in the 50s. Iran was a secular government. And in being a secular government, they wanted and made the determination, their government, their people of that country made a determination that some of the oil wealth should go to the people of that country. That seems like an out there idea. Hey, this is our oil. Everybody should benefit from a resource, a natural resource that we have in this country. Well, of course, that sounded too communistic to try to allow other people to have access to their own product. The United States worked with Britain in order to undermine the government and create a quote-unquote revolution, in which case an Iron Man took over, a brutal dictator that stayed in power for the next 20-so-odd years, until it was overturned by the Shah. I am skeptical of these quote-unquote revolutions. Was the Syrian government, was that revolution that took place in Syria, was that purely an internal matter? Meaning, was it purely something that just sprung up out of nowhere? And then we added our troops? Or was it something that we ourselves had a hand in doing? I am not saying that this is what took place. I'm asking questions about, is it? Because again, the original idea is, I don't know. What I can do is look back at past behavior. That I can do. And in past behavior, it is very clear that we do take sides and we do put our fingers in things in order to change the system, or in order to create a certain amount of opposition and foment a certain amount of resentment against that particular government with ideas of toppling that government. While at the same token saying, hey, we had nothing to do with that. That was purely internal uprising. Those people just decided, we're going to change this goddamn system today. That's possible. But like Kalaic, I'm somewhat skeptical. So I'm splitting the baby on this. If this revolution is just kind of people generated, some spark that set people off, and those people have decided to go out and do this on their own, fully behind it. People should be able to determine what they want to live in. If not, however, and I say that, again, making this point that we shall have nothing to do with this process. One thing that did come up, however, damn it, I lost it. So, part of the reason I'm extraordinarily skeptical about this, and also part of the reason I make this point that government does things, not because government cares about this stuff, is because the political positionings that people take purely is determined by what those people want, not because there's any core there in that sense. Meaning, when people say nice things and they send out these epithets of we're supporting X or we're supporting Y, it has nothing to do with them actually caring about the thing that they're talking about. They're doing it for political reasons. Just like that memo said, we would like to use humanitarian causes as a club to beat people we don't like. One of those groups that was included in that was Iran. Donald Trump, on his most artistic platform, Twitter, has pledged great support for the people of Iran. Let's see. The tweet, which said support will come at the appropriate time as Iranians look to, quote unquote, take back their corrupt government, replaced an earlier tweet, deleted tweet, that called Iran a corrupt and poorly run country, which its people were in a fight to, quote unquote, take back. Such respect for the people of Iran as they try to take their corrupt government. You see great support from the United States at the appropriate time. That's the full Twitter post. Now, Donald Trump, ever since coming into office, has been trying to undermine the Iranian deal. In the rhetoric that he's been using and the things that he's been saying and the people that he's been putting in certain positions, it has been very clear that he has been trying to undermine the uranium deal. The nuclear deal with Iran. Pretext. Is it possible, to any degree that's possible, that in the same way that the United States have worked with other governments to foment resentment and to create protests and create these kind of spontaneous revolutions, is it possible that this is not necessarily just homegrown? And is it possible that we, in some way, had a hand in going about stoking this kind of resentment in a country? It is very, very possible that this country started this just on its own merits. I don't want to necessarily take away agency from people in Iran if they themselves are actually having a protest. But let's be honest. Let's be very honest. There's a history of us getting involved in this stuff. And it is a little suspicious that one of our enemies all of a sudden is having a spontaneous protest all throughout the entirety of the country. And there is no definitive pattern as to why this protest is coming up right now at this moment, or even the main elements of what the protest is about. People have competing ideas on what's going on. So this is a sit by and wait and see. My fear here is that the United States either conjured or is waiting for pretexts in order to take some action against Iran. That's my fear. And I am a little skeptical of the way this goes. Now, that being said, though, Donald Trump tweeting that is absurd. I mean, he's bashed Iran over and over and over and over again, repeatedly, for God knows how long, ever since he's been in that office. And now he gets in, mind you, the guy's been drone striking babies, but he has this great fear, feeling for the Iranian people. It has nothing to do with the Iranian people. It has everything to do with undermining that particular country, using human rights issues as a club, just like the Rex Tillerson memo mentioned, and creating a pretext for U.S. interaction with that country or invasion of that country. So I would remain extraordinarily skeptical of what comes out of talking heads or the media, the polished talking heads telling you about what's going on in Iran, these instant experts. I would be very skeptical about the things that they're saying, particularly if it starts going in a way of us in some way actually getting involved in an overt way. I don't believe this stuff per se. Like I said, I need to be very clear here. It is very possible that this revolt is natural. It's possible. But it's also just as possible that it's not. And yes, we have a history of creating fomenting revolution in countries. Guatemala, Iran, once before Iran, same thing took place. You can make an argument for Syria. I mean, this is not one of those things that is just, like a rare occurrence. This has history to it. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is supportive but skeptical, if that makes sense. And supportive purely from the standpoint of whatever those people choose is what those people want. I want those people to get what they want. So, what I am clear about, unambiguously clear about, is we should have no part of it. We should have nothing to do with it. So, I will leave it at that. Let's see who's here. I have a few of these that I want to do. So, I may not be too long in the comments. But let's see who's here. Bullshit Man is here. Right on, Bullshit Man. My volume is low? What? I checked my volume before I came on. Let's see. Damn. My fault, guys. All right. That should be better. All right. Sorry, guys. Sorry. Let's see. Yeah, from what I can gather, protests are legit, but outside actors definitely using them for their own ends. As expected, the United States has tried to overthrow the government twice in 60 years. Yeah, Bullshit Man, agreed. They're going to try to use everything as an opportunity to try again, not to mention Saudi Arabia, Israel, and cahoots with the United States. Yes, agreed. Absolutely agree. Luca Clemente, just hanging out in left and right spaces where people tell the truth. Luca, Jamal turned up the value. My bad, guys. I didn't see it. Yeah, and the MIC failed in Syria. What MMO are you referring to? I'm referring to this one. I'm putting all of these in the box below. This was a memo that was released by WikiLeaks recently. But the memo is one of those things where it's like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, that is how the United States functions abroad. That being said, people get shocked by that. I mean, somebody, what's the guy name? What is this guy? Sam Harris. Sam Harris making this argument that, well, if George Bush was acting, if George Bush had everything that George Bush wanted, would he have wanted good things for the other country? It's like, he's not going there with humanitarian reasons in mind. This is comically naive. They're going there because they have certain things that they want to accomplish. That's it. It has nothing to do with the people themselves. I mean, when the United States went into Libya, do you honestly believe that the United States went into Libya for humanitarian reasons? When they left, and they left that place to dumpster fire, and you had slave auctions at this point, slave auctions taking place, and then the French president, Macron, getting pissy, and you kind of just make this point, you understand that if you guys hadn't went into Libya and broke the country in that way, they wouldn't be having slave auctions. responsible for this. It's like, how are you getting pissy at something you're responsible for? All right, let's see. I'm trying to make sure all these are there. Yeah, I'm putting all of these in the bottom. I think the truth of the matter is, yeah, they will use anything that they can to get their hands on or to take hold of a certain amount of political influence. And the question becomes, will this be used as some level of pretext for further action? That's the question. And I wouldn't necessarily be shocked by that question. At that point, you can say, well, hey, we're doing this for humanitarian reasons. Part of the sanctions, or part of the point in having those sanctions there, were in order to create a certain amount of distress or unrest in the society itself, hurting the society in order to get it to try to do something towards this government. If you want to ask, what is terrorism? What is terrorism? Is it a certain amount of economic terrorism to use your sanctions to essentially beat the devil out of a country that you don't like because that country is doing something that you don't like? Yeah, I think this is pretext. I think this stuff is pretext. That being said, I have no evidence at all. I don't necessarily know if the United States is fomenting this, which is kind of my point of saying, be ambiguous about this stuff. Whether or not the United States is fomenting this or not, they will use whatever is necessary to try to beat the country over the head with it. So, Libya, Gaddafi wanted a better deal from BP. That's it. Period. Yeah. Well, yeah. Britain and France were essentially divvied up the country in regards to oil companies. Like, it's fucking amazing. I mean, they destroyed a country purely for this kind of economic reasons. That by itself should be front page news, but it is not. This is my point about the media. They literally went into a country using the pretext of humanitarian reasons in order to undermine this idea of gold and oil. Now, when this came out from WikiLeaks, at no point did the media put this on blast saying, holy shit, these guys went into a country to destroy the fucking country. Now they have slave auctions. And this cable, the information that comes out, clearly states that the reason they did this was because of oil and gold. Doesn't come up. Doesn't come up. That's not important enough for our media. It's fucking amazing. Yeah, that doesn't come up. Economic terrorism, yeah. Agreed. The best thing the United States can do in that region right now is to get the fuck out. Dark days, you and I agree. You and I are on the same page. Tabitha Enriquez, 7 countries: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. General Westclock warned us this is the plan. Tabitha, agreed. Agreed. I've shown that video more than one occasion. Agreed. Chris Sean, you're correct to be suspicious, no doubt. Yes, we have a history of it. I mean, like, I could see if somebody said, well, dude, that has never taken place. We've never done that. We have no history of doing that. Where are you getting this from? We have a fabulous history of toppling governments and undermining governments that we don't particularly like. So, I'll put it this way. I would say Trump tweets are problematic at best. I mean, and does it foretell this idea of they're going to try to do something to Syria using these protests as some kind of pretext? I guess part of it depends on how bad these protests get. Then that question becomes, is the United States government finding ways to foment this protest? There was an ad, or there was not an ad, there was a story that came out showing that the United Kingdom was creating spoof Twitter accounts in order to attack Iran, essentially creating all these accounts that are critical or negative information about Iran. This is the UK. So is the United States working with some of his Western allies in order to try to create some foment or some revolution in that country? And can I completely discount that? No, I don't think anybody can. I don't think anyone completely discount that. These protests have been happening in Iran for a while now. They do have a terrible, oppressive government there. We're not the only country with assholes in charge. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. But this seems to be a pretty vicious one. And I don't mean vicious from the standpoint of vicious is too strong. This seems to be a pretty strident one. That's what I'm saying. And it seems to go throughout the entirety of the country. It doesn't seem to be just localized in one particular area. It seems to spread. Exactly. Economic terrorism. We try to stop or slow anyone else trying to be fiscally independent of us. Well, we're not going to have much of a choice. China and Russia were trying to do something in order to get around this idea of the United States sovereignty on economic matters. So this idea of having a unipolar power maybe going away. Drunken Mask, we need to learn more about the Central American countries that are resisting the United States power. They have somehow succeeded. I have to learn more about it. Cheeky Roll, Gaddafi was going to create a gold standard for African American constituent bankers, weren't going to allow that. Yeah, he was trying to unify Africa under a currency. If I'm not mistaken, using his gold reserves. I read that. I did read that. And, you know, this idea of, from a political standpoint, and even from an economic standpoint, is that something you want to deal with, a united Africa? It has been easier to divide those countries and keep those countries divided as opposed to having those countries be one united bloc, in the same way that the European Union is a united bloc. Video game Vision Quest. The media is suddenly clearing about the protests is very suspicious. People in the Mid-East protest against the United States all the time, but they don't get coverage. Yeah, pretty much right. It's like, hey, why are you covering protests now when these guys are protesting our actions in that part of the region? Invisible. Invisible. Yeah. Gemini Dragon, we want our fingers in everybody's pie, and if we aren't allowed to run the show, it's our fingers in their eye instead. It's like, either you do what I say or we're gonna put a club on you. There's a guy, Economic Hitman, I can't think of his name, I think his name is Perkins. Amazing book. There's another one by Smedley Butler, Wars of Racket. That's another really good one, showing this idea between the way of government and corporate interests work hand in hand in order to get their fingers into other markets. And either those leaders in those countries either play ball, or those leaders essentially end up missing, burlap sacked, and by that I mean taken out of that office, either through some kind of revolution, or either get killed. And Perkins, if you ever watch any of his lectures, he goes through this pretty, I mean, in an amazing way, like in awesome terms. I mean, the guy was one of those economic hitmen himself. So yes. What is a finger in your pie or finger in your eye? You get to choose. Yeah, Perkin Reddit, scary shit. Yeah, Gemini Dragon. Yes, it is. It is. It really is. I'm going to end this one. I have another one that I want to do after this, guys. I'm sorry about the mic. If it's too bad, I may redo this locally and push back up. I will listen to the video and see if I can actually hear it without needing some kind of hearing device. So I will be back shortly. Thank you guys for showing up. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon, or at this point, Super Cash. And when I do the live shows, Super Cash, of course. So, thanks, guys.